Hello friends, Tanya here with another Spellbinders January 2024 releases video. Today we're going to play with the Simon Hurley Big Hugs stamp and die set. This is a large 6x8 inch stamp set with coordinating dies for all of the images, and I'm going to use all three of the characters on this stamp set for our card today. I have inked them all up with some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and I'm stamping them on some 80-pound white cardstock. I am going to do two stampings with this, and after the fact, like way after, after I colored them, I realized that I was using not the best ink for Copic Coloring. We're going to Copic color these cute little critters with alcohol markers. I'm using some warm browns to add some dimension and a little bit of highlights or lowlights to our panda's white areas. I started out with my darker of the two warm browns that I used and added some shadow areas and came back with the lighter. Next, I'm taking a couple of pink colors, a darker and a lighter, and I am adding some shades to the tongue and the little toe beans. For our pug, he's getting some warm browns, again starting with the darkest color and working my way to the darkest. I think I have three colors for our cute little pug here, and I'm working on the darkest color right now, adding the darkest areas, and I'm coming in with our mid-tone and blending that in and coming in a little further over the belly. And finally with our lightest tone to blend everything together and add some areas of highlight. I did decide to come back, let's do his tongue, doing those same two pinks for his tongue. He doesn't have any toe beans to color in, they're all black. And we're going to add a little pink to the insides of his ears and come back with a little bit of the pink over his muzzle. We are going to make an orange tabby kitty here, and I'm using some reddish brown. This is an E9, and I think I'm going to use an E7 next, and then I'm going to use a YR27, I think, as my last color. And this is a really good red, like ginger color combination, whether for hair or for animals. This works pretty nicely. I use my mid-tone for the muzzle dark area, and then I'm coming back in after I've done all of my dark areas and my mid-tones, and I'm going to blend everything in with our lightest color. This is a pretty dark orange tabby. I probably could have gone with a little bit of a lighter blend, but I actually like how this turned out. Back in with our cute little pink toe beans and our pink tongue with two different shades, plus we're adding a little color to the insides of our kitty's ears. And you can see I'm getting the ink from the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink off of my marker by scribbling on the cardstock to remove that, and the marker tip is just fine. I put the sheet of paper back in the MISTI, and I had not moved the stamps. I cleaned them, but I didn't move them. And then I did a dry fit over the images to make sure they were lined up correctly. And now we're stamping them again with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. I'm only going to do one stamping. And I didn't use my anti-static powder bag. However, I'm using clear embossing powder, and I don't think it'll get in the way if it gets any place I don't want it to be. So I'm just going to cover all of that stamping with the clear embossing powder to seal that in and add some raised shininess to it, and heat it with my heat tool until it's nice and clear and raised and shiny, which will make these just that much more special. Heat embossing is one of my favorite things to do. It's a very easy technique, and the supplies for it last forever. This heat tool I'm using is actually from my Stampin' Up! Days, and so it's almost 20 years old. And you'll notice it has a silver tip. You're not going to find that on most embossing guns. Mine was dropped on the floor a couple times, and the plastic cover over the tip was broken off. I still love that embossing gun. It works great. Now I've die cut all of these cute critters with their coordinating dies, and there was a little spot on one of the stripes on our kitty that did not get black. So I went back with a Sharpie and filled it in, and you would never know. Now I'm going to do some watercoloring on this piece of watercolor paper. I cut this down to 4.5 by 6.5 inches because, of course, I'm making another 5 by 7 card. I don't think all 3 of these critters would fit on a smaller card. We're going to now run this through the Balloons and Banners embossing folder. This is from May of 2022. It's one of the 3D embossing folders from the 3D embossing folder of the Month Club, and it's still available. There's also a floating balloons embossing folder that is just balloons available. So depending on which one you have in your stash or which one you want to get, you could use either of these for this theme. Now I chose to color the background before I painted the embossed banners and balloons, and I wanted kind of an aqua or pool party or cool pool colored background, and I'm coming back in with some very primary type colors. I have an orange, a blue, a green, a yellow, and I do come back in with a deeper red, and I'm going across this embossed background and carefully watercoloring each of the balloons in the background. Now this doesn't have to be super precise. It's okay if it's a little bit sloppy, and my colors are actually a little more vibrant than I intended. I had added some water to my watercolors before I started the embossing, and so they were very re-moistened and very dense. The paint was very dense. I could have watered them down a little bit, and as I go, I do figure that out and water each of the colors down a little more as I'm going. I did decide to leave all of the coloring and painting in the video, so this could be a little bit of a slower, sort of, because I have this quite sped up. This is about 4 times my normal speed. So I paint much slower than what you're seeing on the screen, but I left all of the coloring and the painting in because everyone seems to enjoy that process. It might be very relaxing. Actually, I find it very relaxing to do the painting, so I imagine it's relaxing to watch. Unless you're like me and you have ADHD and you watch everything on double speed and everyone thinks you're crazy. What can I say? There is a way to watch this slowed down if you would like to do that. I even watch my own videos double speed. I know, again, crazy, but there's a little gear symbol somewhere on your device, whether it's a computer or your phone. If you click on that gear device, you're going to have some options, and playback speed is one of them. And you can change that speed. You can speed it up or slow it down. So if you're finding this is going too slow or too fast for you, you can change that speed. I will not be offended if you choose to skip the painting and the coloring. I understand that may not be what you came to this video for, but it's a very therapeutic thing. I love to use watercolors. There are lots of great watercolors out there. I've said this before. Use what you have in your stash. You could even do this with your ink re-inkers or smushed ink pads onto like an acrylic surface or an acetate sheet. Those are supplies that are easily accessible in most of our craft rooms. The most difficult part of this painting was seeing the edges of the embossed items. So I kept tilting this in the light so I could see what I was doing. And sometimes I had to hold it at a funny angle to do my painting while I held it off of the surface. Now this is not real difficult for me. I have pretty good dexterity in both of my hands. This might be difficult if you have just one good hand. in which case I don't know that I would do this technique. It's pretty tough. I did not put my cheaters on. I thought about it. They were within arm's reach. Is anybody else as stubborn as I am when it comes to admitting that you need to use your cheaters? I sometimes just don't want to stop what I'm doing to reach over across my desk to pick up the cheaters and put them on my face. Maybe because I've always had pretty darn good vision my entire life. So admitting that I need to wear them to do close work might be a little tough for me to do. I should just get over myself and do it, right? When it starts affecting my quality of my painting and coloring, then I guess it will be undeniable and I won't be able to stop. I won't be able to prevent myself from doing it anymore. Do I have any fun stories for you this week? Well, my youngest grandson decided he wanted to look like his dog this week, and so he colored his face, and it comes off fairly easily, thankfully. My kids all did that, where they used markers or makeup or whatever they could get their hands on and colored on themselves. And there's always that startling moment after the child has done it. Sometimes the child feels this startle, and sometimes it's just the parents, where you're just worried that it might not come off. I do remember one time when my kids were little that my kids were all in Head Start, and the teacher would come to the house and we would do art activities and stuff. And one time they left some tempera paints for the kids to play with. Well, I've discovered that you cannot paint over tempera paint on sheetrock, because my beautiful, delightful children decided to paint a wall that had not been painted yet in the house. It was just bare sheetrock with tempera paint. I tried every primer you can think of to go over that tempera paint. It just wasn't going to happen. So, FYI, I don't think tempera paint is a great paint to have at your house. Not with little kids. There are lots of other options. Have you had any of those kinds of mishaps with your children? I'd love to hear those stories. I did decide to come back after I painted all of those banners yellow with some gold iridescent watercolor. And I decided to go ahead and paint the strings and any of the confetti that I can find in the background with the gold also. And I think that really bumped up the look of this background. The background took probably longer than any other component of this card, but I think it really turned out pretty good. It's nice and bold. It isn't exactly the way I envisioned it. I was thinking a little lighter, but I do like how it turned out. I did spatter it with some gold watercolor paint too. Now we're going to use the Essential Modern Ovals dies to create a vellum backdrop for our cute little critters. And I die cut a bunch of scrap cardstock layers to go behind our little critters, because they're going to overlap each other and we're going to need different levels of additional cardstock behind each of these critters. They each got a base layer because I wanted them to have a little extra stability as per usual. So I'm going to glue those to the back of each of these critters, matching the coordinating cutout. I'm using my heavyweight block just to make sure that they adhere together really well before we use them on the card. I love that there are coordinating dies for this. You've heard me say it over and over again. Coordinating dies are my jam. I do not like to fussy cut. And if I don't have coordinating dies for something, I am for surezies going to use my brother's Scan and Cut. It is much faster and easier for me to use a coordinating die though. Now that I have the main panel adhered to the card base, which I did put a little bit of extra cardstock behind that panel also, and I did run that panel back through the embossing folder just to make sure that I had good impression after I had wet it with all of that watercolor. Now it's time to add our critters to that vellum oval. I started with the panda. He went near the top. Next is going to be our kitty, and I'm adding extra cardstock strategically behind her or him, and I'm going to adhere that down. So you can see that I am using my extra layers of cardstock for each of these little critters very carefully. So now I'm going to cut off the part that's going to overlap the cat. And I'm going to adhere that to the back of our little pug, making sure everything lines up correctly. Now I have a little extra cardstock left from snipping those apart, and I'm going to add extra layer under the base of our little pug and add glue to the back of that and add that to our pile of critters. You can see each of their arms spread wide in excitement. Now I'm going to take an extra piece of cardstock and glue that behind the vellum, making sure it stays hidden behind our critters' bodies, because we want to have a little bit of lift behind that vellum for the best effect. Now, hindsight, this might have looked better with a white oval behind our critters, or an off-white or gold, something a little more solid. But I think either way this works. Just a solid color would have added a little extra definition behind them. Now I have a piece of black cardstock that I've treated with my anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to use some clear embossing ink with a couple of the sentiments from the stamp set. I'm going to ultimately stamp these 3 times to make sure I have a very good solid inking. This is a cheap black watercolor, or black cardstock, not watercolor cardstock, and so it doesn't tend to take the ink as well as, say, the Spellbinders Onyx cardstock. I've got some brass embossing powder here. You could use gold. This is just the one that I happened to grab out of my embossing drawer. I am going to heat set this with my heat tool, and we'll get some beautiful, shiny, deep gold embossing on this black cardstock. I think that turned out really well. I'm going to use my dry microfiber cloth and brush off any extra embossing powder. And now we're going to use the Precision Layering Mini Slimline set, and I'm grabbing a couple of long rectangular dies here to cut out our sentiments. There are not coordinating dies for these sentiments, but that's okay. These are a very simple thing to die cut, or if you wanted, you could trim it out with your paper cutter or with your scissors if you're that talented, which I am not. I'm just using the Best Ever Craft tape to hold those dies in place and ran that through my die cutting machine. So there I have my sentiment banners. I'm going to trim this one down a little bit. This is going to go on the front of the card. Just using my little trimmer here, trying to make sure that there is an equal amount of dead space on each side of our sentiment. Look at that. He fits great. I'm going to take some of this black cardstock to add a little extra height behind our word celebrate. Now you could make this, with this sentiment, it could be for all kinds of things, for a graduation, for any kind of celebration. I did choose to make this a birthday card though, with the inside sentiment. We're going to take some Concord 9th wheat ink. I thought this matched the color of our pug on the outside, although it's just a little, it's not as warm a brown as the brown in the pug. It is what it is. It is not a perfect match, but it will work. So I'm going to stamp each of these critters on the inside of the card. I'm using a stamp platform that's open on 2 sides, so I can stick my 5x7 card base into the stamping platform. I'm going to clean each of these stamps before I remove them because I don't want ink everywhere. That would be disastrous. I am not a coordinated person and I would make a mess. So we're going to get our panda on here. Pandas are absolutely not wheat colored. However, I was going for a more subtle look on the inside. Antique linen might have been a better option, but I wanted to try this out, see how I liked it. And then we're going to take the black and gold sentiment and glue that to the inside of the card. You don't always have to use a white piece of cardstock for your sentiment, even if it's going on the inside of the card. I like to think of the inside of the card as another opportunity to decorate it. There is our completed card. I really enjoyed making these cute critters. I really think these deserve to have some action, but I haven't figured out how to do that yet. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you aren't subscribed, now would be a great time to do that. If you're interested in any of the product that I used today, check that description box below. They will be listed and linked as always. There will also be a visual links list available, so you can go click on that and see the products that I used today. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And until next time, here are a couple more videos I thought you might enjoy. Bye-bye.